All right, this is part 2 of chapter 10, Lifespan Development, part 2. And now we're going to talk about developmental challenges throughout adulthood. All right, so we're adults, we've grown up, we've gone through all the tidings of childhood and adolescence. And now we look at relationships. So I want you to take a moment, of course, pause the video so that you can read through each and answer each question either yes or no to yourself and commit these answers. You can write it and jot it down on paper. I'm probably not going to put it in a discussion board, and then maybe I will. I don't think so, but just for yourself, go through and take a look and see what potential pitfalls of a relationship expectations you may successfully, want to deal with successfully in terms of a relationship and try to avoid in terms of breakup and divorce. One of the first steps you want to be able to examine is your personal dreams as well as your expectations for long-term relationships. And then you want to also think about where did they come from in the first place? Are these expectations realistic? Marriage therapists and researchers, they have been consistently doing studies in which they find that realistic expectations are actually the true key ingredient in having a successful relationship in the first place. So things you want to be able to do is be able to establish what we call love maps. Asking yourself, do you believe that emotional closeness is naturally developed, or when two people have the right chemistry or have those similarities? Yes or no? To be successful in relationships, both partners have to be willing to share their feelings as well as their life goals. This sharing leads to a detailed love map of what each other's inner emotional life as well as creation of shared meaning would be within a relationship. So now let's look at the second one in terms of second thing, shared power as well as mutual support. Have you unconsciously accepted the imbalance of power that's promoted by media like TV sitcoms? Or are you willing to fully share power and to respect your partner's point of view, even when you don't agree? Yes or no? You see, the common portrayal of husbands as head of households and wives as the little women and the homemakers who secretly wield the power may actually help create unrealistic expectations for a marriage. Excuse me. All right, let's look at the third one. Conflict management. So, do you expect to change your partner or to be able to resolve all your problems? Yes or no? Well, successful couples who work hard, and that's going to be through negotiations as well as accommodation, they tend to solve their solvable conflicts and they're able to accept those unsolvable ones as well as know the difference between the two. The fourth one. So now we're looking at similarities. Do you believe that opposites attract? Well, I think we had a discussions about opposites attract in an earlier chapter. But you need to answer it for yourself. Yes or no? Although we all know couples who are very different, but they're still happy, there are similarities in them. That being values, beliefs, their religions, and the list can go on. It's one of the best predictors for us to understand what a long-lasting relationship will be. All right, let's look at the fifth one now. Supportive social environments. So, do you believe that love conquers all? Yes or no? Well, Unfortunately, there are several environmental factors that play as a power that actually can overpower or slowly erode even the strongest love relationships. And this includes age, that being younger couples, they have a higher divorce rate than those who are middle age or older. Uh, Another issue is money and employment. Divorce is higher among those who are considered impoverished or are unemployed. Parents' marriages. Now, divorce is higher for children who have parents who are divorced. Then there's the length of courtship. The longer you date, the better it is. Remember, marry in haste, repent. Okay, that's what I'm talking about in this one. And so, looking at this, we also look at premarital pregnancy. If in the relationship, if there was no pregnancy at the start, in before you get married, then they say the better chance the relationship lasts. All right. So now let's talk about the next section, positive emphasis. So question, do you believe that an intimate relationship is a place where you can indulge your bad moods and openly criticize one another? Yes or no? You need to think about that again if you say yes. Positive emotions, positive mood, and then positive behavior toward one's partner are vital. It's important for a lasting, happy relationship. It's just necessary. Remember what I said about misery loving company? Well, if you're miserable and you try to drag your partner into it, your partner might not want to stand for that too long. And they'll be over before you know it. So you don't want to be too critical of an individual. You want to try to be understanding. All right, so now we're going to talk about commitment and committed relationships. One of the most important tasks that we face during adulthood would be that of establishing a continuing, loving sexual relationship with one another. Yet, attempting to navigate such partnerships can be really challenging. Think about this. Approximately half of all marriages within the United States end in divorce. That's huge, with serious implications that will be for both adult and child development. So, in terms of talking about adults, both spouses generally will experience emotional as well as practical difficulties, and then they're at higher risk for depression as well as physical health problems. A lot of times, these issues are going to present even before the marriage is disrupted. In terms of talking about expectations, realistic expectations really is a key ingredient to maintaining that successful relationship. So you have so many people though that harbor unrealistic expectations about marriage as well as the role of a husband and wife. Think about opening the door to every kind of problem that can exist within a marriage, all because of these expectations that's been placed upon a person's perceptions. Now, in talking about families, we have to also realize and understand not every family dynamic is going to be the perfect one. Okay? Abuse occurs in many forms, that being physical, verbal, as well as emotional in a family dynamic at times. Violence is more likely to happen in families and relationships that's experiencing financial issues, substance abuse, mental disorders, as well as that social isolation. Okay, and the external factors combined with the fact that many abusers lack good communication and interpersonal skills, and their victims generally have no one to turn to for help or any kind of feedback that would help them get through it, which will lead to increasing anxiety as well as frustration, which that stressor is going to eventually explode into a violent act. The fact of it is, one of the clearest identifiers for abuse potential would be impulsivity. So you want to make sure you jot that down. Impulsivity, because that probably will be a test question for the final. But in terms of talking about how we deal with these things, treatment with anti-anxiety as well as serotonin enhancing drugs like Prozac or fluoxetine can help lower the risk of some of the forms of impulsive violence. Now, let's talk about how we keep going, how resilience is an influence to having a well adjusted way of being. Because despite the odds, there are children who are able to survive, even prosper in these harsh circumstances that I mentioned when you have a dysfunctional family. Okay. Uh, Ann Mastern at the University of Minnesota, as well as Douglas Coatsworth at the University of Miami, they identified specific traits as well as environmental conditions that helps resiliency. And when I talk about resiliency, I'm talking about that ability to adapt effectively in the face of any kind of threat or challenge, which seems to account for the resilient child's success. And it includes a good intellectual functioning. That helps a resilient child solve problems or be able to protect themselves from any type of adverse conditions that's present. All right. So, moving from families, let's talk about where we are in terms of work and retirement when we're leaving middle age and we're becoming an elder. Too often, career choices are driven by our dreams of having that high income. We want to make that six figures. Nearly 74% of college freshmen that was surveyed through the Higher Education Research Institute reported that being very well off financially was extremely important or essential. 71% felt the same way about raising a family. So we know that through these different studies that we want to be able to have family, but we want that career that's going to make us financially sound and secure. Though we also need to seek those positive type of careers. And when I say a positive type of career, one that is going to give you a balance, not only of work, but of family, of friends, of you being able to stay well adjusted. Now, according to the activity theory, okay, a successful agent would appear to be more strongly related to good health, control over your life, social support, as well as being able to say that you are participating with the community services as well as different social activities. And the activity theory of aging largely displaced older notion that successful aging entails a natural and graceful withdrawal from life. This disengagement theory has been seriously questioned and largely abandoned by theorists. It's being mentioned because of the historical relevance and because of its connection to the influence of modern theory, that being the social emotional selectivity theory, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So that social emotional selectivity theory, now we're talking about a perspective that is going to help explain the predictable decline within a social contact that almost everybody will experience as they move into the becoming an elder. Okay? According to this theory, we don't naturally withdraw from society in our later years. We just become more selective with our time. We choose what we want to do. Some may not choose to want to do the social scene. Some may become homebodies. But we deliberately decrease our total number of social contacts in favor of being around familiar people who's going to give us something emotionally meaningful. Those interactions that will fill our souls, so to speak. Okay? If you look at the chart and we talk about the salience of social motives, you can see through infancy moving all the way to adulthood, it gives you an idea about how that decline occurs and how we're looking more about ourselves again rather than thinking of everybody else per se. So that's what it is. Now, there's a number of popular beliefs about age-related crises which really hasn't been supported through research, but it's always discussed. One would be a popular idea of the midlife crisis that I mentioned earlier, though individuals do go through that. My personal opinion, though. But that it began largely as a result of Sheely's national bestseller, Passages. And if you haven't read that book, it is a pretty good book to read. I had to read that book in grad school. But what she pretty much drew on the theory of Levinson. And Levinson was, along with Levinson, psychiatrist Roger Gould, uh, as well as her own interviews. She kind of popularized the idea that almost everyone will experience a predictable crisis uh, once they hit midlife, which at average age is like 35 for women and 40 for men. And middle age often is a time of re-examination of our values, how our life has been going, what type of goals we have set. But Sheehy's book led a lot of people to think automatically to expect that you're going to have a drastic midlife crisis with these humongous eventful changes in your personality as well as your behavior. Of course, we've done research in the area, and it's been suggested that a severe reaction or crisis may actually be quite rare, as well as not as typical of what most people would think or the experience of middle age would be. So a lot of people also believe that when the last child leaves home, most parents is going to experience what we call the emptiness syndrome. And the emptiness syndrome is thinking of a painful separation in time of depression for the mother, the father, or both. Again, research suggests that emptiness syndrome might be a little exaggerated in terms of the level of pain that's going to be experienced by a few individuals. And then they're in an effort to be able to downplay positive reactions. Like for some parents, their last child being out the house means freedom. They happy. They get to do things that they put aside because they put the priority on the children. But now the children are adults and they're able to, start doing things on their own. But look at it like this. One major benefit of the emptiness is that increase of marital satisfaction. Also, parent-child relationships is going to continue once the child leaves the house. It's not like, okay, I will never see my children again. Now, I have 3 adult sons, and I have one son that's still with me here, but my other 2 are in 2 different states, and I have stepchildren in another state. But we try to stay connected in different ways. We don't see each other every day no more. Sometimes we'll throw each other a text. We'll shout out, hey, what's going on? How you doing? I still have a relationship with my children. And it may not be every day. Sometimes, because everybody have a life that they're leading. And sometimes I don't hear from 2 of my sons for months at a time. Do I miss them? Sure. But I also understand that they're now adults leading their own lives in their own ways. So it's an expectation. Do it hurts me to the point where I'm depressed and woe is me? Nope, not at all. With that being said, one mother said during a study that the emptiness is surrounded by telephone wires. Think about what she meant by that. For us, we don't have telephone wires to use anymore. We have the cell phone or smartphone, Wi-Fi, the internet. You, you do FaceTime. You can Skype. You can see the person still. Technology's a wonder, isn't it? All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Now I'm going to come and start to discuss a part where a lot of people get uncomfortable when I start talking about death and dying. To experience someone passing, it's probably been difficult for a person. But what we have to realize and understand that just as we are born, eventually there will come a day that we die. So here again, I'm going to have you stop and look, okay, and think about your mortality, for example. I want you to look at this slide and rate yourselves from the slide. How does your total score will compare to what the national average is going to be? And that national average is 8.5. So as you can see, it's like on a Likert scale of 0 being not at all, 1 being somewhat, and 2 being very much. Take a moment. Of course, you don't have to pause this. You will have the slides, the PowerPoint slides, in which you can look up this particular slide and do this on your own. But when this same test was given to nursing home residents, senior citizens, and college students, there was no significant difference found, despite the fact that those tested ranged within the age of 30 to 80 years old. So I want you to think about it for yourself, see where you are in terms of having any type of anxieties in regards to death, or is there an acceptance and understanding of it for you? All right, looking at attitudes toward death and dying. Once we're adults, we know that death happens basically in 3 different concepts, that being permanence. Once a living thing dies, it's not going to come right back to life. Although I gotta say, there have been exceptions to the rule. A couple of years, it's been about 2 years now. Yeah, I think 2 years. We're in the Delta, elderly gentleman who thought was passed on. They was about to embalm him, and he woke up, and he had been out there as far as they was considered. He had died a couple of days earlier, and he was about to be embalmed, and he woke up. I say, and depending on one's spirituality, that his higher power said it wasn't time for him to go yet. There was something still unfinished. That's my belief. But he did pass on again, and for good, about 6 months later. So we know that its permanence is involved. Second thing is it's universal. All living things eventually will die. Finally, the third one would be non-functionality. Okay? All living functions, including our thoughts, our movements, vital signs, will stop once death occurs. Now, in terms of talking about research, we looked at how permanence, there's a notion that death cannot be reversed. Meaning once you pass, that it's the first and most easily understood concept, basically. When we have this understanding about universality, that comes actually a little later. And generally speaking, for children, it occurs around 7 years of age. Most children will have mastered non-functionality and have an adult-like understanding of death if it's been explained to them appropriately. All right, so Kübler-Ross. This is talking about how we go through different facets when we're experiencing death, like of a loved one, Um, and more or less speaking in terms of these stages, let's start with denial. It's of that terminal type condition. So someone might have been told that they're in the fourth stage of cancer and it's terminal. Okay, initially that person might say, I mean, it can't be true. Same holds true when a person that you care about dies. I can remember when I lost my brother, when I had a brother who was murdered. And I got a call, it was the middle of the night, from my sister-in-law telling me what happened. And I literally cussed her out. I was like, why would you play such a sick joke? And hung up on her. And it took me a couple of hours to let it sink in that my brother was gone. So that's an example of what denial is. The next thing, like I said, let's go back to the case in point of when a person is told that they only have a certain time left to live, and then they may express anger. Why me? This isn't fair. Or in the case I had when my brother was murdered and I was told, I was angry. I was angry at the person who took his life. I was angry at my sister-in-law for telling me this. Then it lasted for a couple of days. Then we start bargaining. A person who's terminally ill might look toward their higher power and ask, Lord, if you let me live, I'll dedicate my life to you for always. After this stage, depression might hit. If you're thinking about family, losing a family members, it can be the depressing state. And you might think, I'm losing everyone and everything that I hold dear to me. Finally, the fifth stage is acceptance. Here's when you understand that death is inevitable, and for the person who is have been diagnosed terminally ill, they know their time is near, and then they start thinking in ways of how to make the best of their life in the end. Now, there are critics of the stage theory of dying that stresses that the five-stage sequence has not been scientifically validated and that each person's death is unique. It's a unique experience. But others worry that popularizing such a stage theory may cause more avoidance and stereotyping about dying. Oh, he's just in that anger stage right now. Don't worry about it. Nonetheless, Kubler-Ross agreed that not all people will go through these stages in the exact same way, and regrets if anybody would ever use her theory as a model for saying it's a good death. All right, so now this is a review in which you take a moment and again look over and for yourself be able to see if you can match which stage this particular statement would be. For example, I understand that I'm dying, but if I could just have a little more time. Think of the five stages and put what you think it would be. Okay? All right. So, this actually brings us to the end of chapter 10. It was a doozy. In all, we went to about 130, not 130. It's early for me. But it went to about an hour and a half. So, hopefully everything is clear for you. If not, you can always send me a message in the inbox. If you have a question, I'll be happy to answer it for you. Don't forget to complete your assignments as well as complete the discussion board. And I want y'all to have a great week. All right. We'll talk again.